Well, hello, lovers of freedom. This is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. Nice to be back with y'all this Saturday evening. If you're watching this program live or if you're watching it recorded, I assume that most of you are familiar with the Future of Freedom Foundation, but just in case we got one or two new viewers, I'd like to invite you to come and visit our website at fff.org. We've got a free daily email update. All you got to do is send us an email saying, hey, subscribe to email update. We strive to make it the best libertarian op-ed page or commentary page on the internet. We got a journal called Freedom Daily. That's by subscription. It goes out monthly. And, invite you to take a look. We present an uncompromising libertarian case at the Future of Freedom Foundation, a moral case, philosophical, economic case, and you'll see that a little bit tonight because we're going to be talking about a subject that is, one of the most important subjects in the libertarian movement, and that's the welfare state. And you'll see as we go along in this program today, and you'll see on our website, that FFF takes an uncompromising approach to the welfare state. We've often felt that, since our inception we have felt that, one cannot compromise principles, as Leonard Reed, the founder of the Foundation for Economic Education, liked to point out. One can only abandon principles. And so, at FFF, when it comes to the welfare state and so many other, status programs, the drug war, and the SCC, all the foreign interventionism, we take an uncompromising stand. Now, if you've been watching this program for the last several weeks or so, you know that I've been pointing to the Middle East as providing some real valuable lessons for Americans, and one would hope that Americans are watching what's going on there and picking up the lessons, because we're learning a lot. We're learning a lot about U.S. foreign policy. The hypocrisy involved with U.S. foreign policy, why so many people hate the United States because of what the U.S. government does. I mean, look, right now we're seeing it. They're intervening in Libya, in the civil war in Libya, claiming, we've got to do this. President Obama said a few minutes ago, we don't have a choice. Well, there's always a choice. And at the very same time, the dictatorships in Bahrain and Yemen are doing the same thing Gaddafi's doing. They're shooting defenseless demonstrators because, they got gun control in these countries, something that President Obama also believes in. And so they can't fire back at these government murderers, these government goons that shoot people in the back, shoot them while they're sleeping and so forth. And but hey, they're not going to intervene in Yemen and Bahrain because these are U.S. dictators. You see, if a dictator is a member of the U.S. empire, then they're not going to do anything to him. It doesn't matter what he does to his people. Oh, yeah, they'll slap him on the wrist and lecture him a little bit. But by and large, they're not going to do like what they're doing with Gaddafi. They're not going to attack. They're not going to invade because this is their dictator. This is their guy in their pocket. And so, they're going to support him. That's why they keep pouring foreign aid into the military dictatorship in Egypt and Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Bahrain. Bahrain, they've got a military base there. So, they got to keep supporting the dictator there because he might kick them out if he gets mad at them. So, we're seeing a little bit of the hypocrisy and why foreigners just, they really don't like the United States, a lot of them. They like the American people, but they don't like the U.S. government at all. And many of them draw a distinction. They do something that Americans don't do. They draw a distinction between the U.S. government and the American people. Unfortunately, here in this country, there's all too many Americans that just look at it as all one and the same. And some of the terrorists do too. That's why they're willing to attack, civilian, targets, and private people and so forth, private Americans, because they see it all as one and the same thing. Well, a lot of Americans do too. They see this as just one great big, humongous whole composed of the citizenry and the government. Well, of course, that's nonsense. And the nonsense is, the perfect proof that it's nonsense, of course, is the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, which expressly protect the American people from the federal government, because, as I've said before in this show, our American ancestors viewed the federal government as the biggest threat to their freedom and to their well-being. Now, of course, that mindset's been abandoned in the 20th and the 21st centuries. Americans now view the government as their buddy, as their friend, as their big brother, as their daddy. Some even view the government as a god. I mean, they consider it heresy to criticize the government, to question what the government's doing, especially in foreign affairs. Now, there's also lessons to be learned in the Middle East with respect to the welfare state. Today, in the New York Times, we have this headline: amid protest, Saudi king raises benefits but strengthens security. And the article goes on to say that King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia has offered $93 billion more in benefits to the Saudi people. Now, that's a lot of money. $93 billion. The king is saying to the Saudi people, I'm going to give you $93 billion more in benefits than you're already receiving. I mean, who could turn down that sort of thing, I mean, that's just fantastic. Oh, Mr. King, thank you so much. Thank you for being so good to us. Gosh, we don't even have to work for it. I mean, this is what I mean about a God. This God just dispenses largesse, $93 billion in benefits. Well, of course, what's going on here? Well, it's clear what's going on. There's a dictatorship in Saudi Arabia. It's ruled for a long time. Granted, it's a U.S.-supported dictatorship, but it's a dictatorship nonetheless. And those dictatorships like to remain in power. I mean, they live good lives in the Saudi ruling regime. I mean, they live luxurious lives. They don't want to give that up. They got power. They got, luster. They got adulation. They got people bowing to them. They got servants. They got beautiful resorts. They got cash out the gazoo. They got Swiss bank accounts. They get, they got family members all within the government. I mean, this is the good life, all right? This dictatorship doesn't want to give it up, but you see, it knows that there's protests all across the Middle East against dictatorship. I mean, there's a lot of people riled up, as we all know. They don't want dictatorship. They look around the world and they see people are doing well, the average person, and they see people voting people out of office. They see people criticizing government and not being sent to jail for it, and so they're demonstrating for a change in structure, in political structure. And, of course, this makes the dictatorships extremely nervous, as we've seen. Dictatorships don't want to lose control over over the country and their nice little lifestyle and so forth. Now, sometimes, there's a violent crackdown, like Gaddafi. I mean, he's a dictator. He's not part of the U.S. empire, although, I should point out that President Obama was giving serious consideration not too long ago of sending weaponry to Gaddafi, the way that President Obama and President Bush before him sends weaponry to Yemen and Bahrain and Egypt and Saudi Arabia and helps train their forces that then, of course, are used to oppress the people, torture the people, and so forth. But this is a time-honored way to keep people pacified. Put them on welfare. That's what these benefits. When they say $93 billion in benefits, we're talking about welfare. Now, that welfare may come in the form of cash or food stamps or subsidies or education vouchers or whatever. All the New York Times said was that the king is offering benefits. Well, the idea is it's like heroin. These governments that are really harsh on the war on drugs, and Saudi Arabia is one of them. It's one of the partners in the U.S. empire and the war on drugs and so forth. In fact, they use the war on drugs to have these so-called security measures, that he's imposing. He's strengthened security. Well, we all know what that means. Crackdown on dissidents and critics, that people that have the audacity to question the machine. But you put people on welfare. It pacifies them. It's like a heroin. It's a narcotic. It makes them happy. It makes them grateful. It's like, oh, wow. I mean, it's like sitting in instead of an opium den and, it's, smoking, cocaine or heroin or whatever. It's a welfare den where everybody's just getting injected with his welfare, and oh, thank you so much. Oh, thank you, Mr. King. Thank you for giving me my welfare, helping me with my food bill and my rent bill, and oh gosh, maybe they'll even impose price controls. Oh, please, King, please give me more benefits. And of course, the idea is that as people become dependent on this, they're less likely to object, to protest, to revolt, because they've lost that sense of independence, that sense of I'm not going to put up with this anymore. They're on the narcotic. They're like stoned out with their nice little welfare benefits. That's why the king is giving this junk to them, and at the same time is strengthening security just in case it's not enough. But that's the purpose of it. It's not because, oh, the king loves his people. Oh, he's so concerned about them. In fact, now, in Saudi Arabia, the king owns the oil industry. Surprise, surprise on that. It's just a socialist system there. I mean, which is in large part why the people out on the streets are so poor. And part of socialism is the government ownership over the means of production. Now, they may use some of these oil revenues for the benefits, but I doubt it. What they're really going to do, they're not going to interfere in a substantial way with their own lifestyle. What they're going to do is they're going to go out and tax the citizenry. You see, I mean, you tax the citizenry, you get the $93 billion in taxes from the citizenry, and then you give it back to them in terms of welfare benefits. I mean, it's the perfect scam, and the average guy on the street, he doesn't figure it out. He doesn't know what's going on, because a lot of times the tax is done in terms of inflation, where the government just, to pay that $93 billion in benefits, just starts printing the money up. And so all of a sudden, the monetary unit starts being debased, which is reflected in rising prices of everything, because everything's measured in the money unit. But nobody understands that it's the government doing this. All they're thinking is, oh, I got all these benefits, and look at all these private sector businessmen that are raising their prices. Well, it's just a big scam. I mean, but it shows you how stark this is, how crass it is. When these U.S.-supported dictators and offer this welfare benefit, to try to pacify people, mollify people, and it's not just in Saudi Arabia. They're doing it. I read somewhere Bahrain or Yemen, somewhere in these other countries, maybe all of them. They're trying to buy off the people. Oh, look what we're doing for you with the money that we take from you with our tyrannical, dictatorial tax collectors. Now, over here in the United States, it's no different. We like to pretend, oh, no, America's different. Nonsense. They use the welfare system in the exact same way to pacify people, to keep people pacified. In fact, the predominant role of the U.S. government, let's face it, is dominance in world affairs. I mean, this is where the empire is. This is where the, military bases in 130 countries, 1,000 military bases. You've got a president that has unlimited powers. I mean, nobody can deny that in foreign affairs, President Obama is a dictator because he has dictatorial powers. There are no limits on his powers. Look, he just is attacking Libya on his own initiative with his military. And I guarantee you, his military is not going to object. That's the purpose of a standing army. Its loyalty is to the president. Okay, now we all know, but Jacob, they take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. It's all window dressing. Because in the minds of the military, the CIA, and so forth, they believe that when they follow the orders of the president, they're supporting and defending the Constitution. I mean, that's how they've rationalized this whole thing. And or they're protecting national security. So if the president says, troops, this is national security, WMDs and so forth, well, They're going to believe the president. I mean, they're going to follow orders, and we're going to see this in Libya. We saw it in Iraq. We saw it in Afghanistan. I mean, I don't. There was no soldier that refused to deploy to initially in the initial invasion of Iraq, despite the fact this was a clear-cut war of aggression. Iraq had never attacked the United States, and now we're going to see it again. Libya has never attacked the United States. This is a civil war that's going on in that country. If Americans want to go over there and help out the rebels, hey, go at it. Go join the rebel force. But not one single American interventionist, any neocon, any conservative, any liberal, the liberals are calling for humanitarian intervention. Not one single one of them has gone and joined the rebels. They always want their daddy to do it. The government do it. I want the troops to do it. And I want to support the troops and so forth. Well, that's welfare. I mean, the welfare comes in various forms. You've got the welfare in the form of what's going on in Libya. The idea is that, these rebels they need our help. They're like little children. We must go in there and we must give them a hand. We must support them. We must start killing Libyans. We must go after Gaddafi's military forces. We must take care of them. They can't do it on their own. I mean, it's really going to be another humiliating experience. You've got the old colonial powers, Britain, France, and now the big colonialists, the U.S., are going in there to, for welfare, military welfare in the form of bombs and cruise missiles and airplane attacks and so forth. We're here to help you. We're doing it all for you because we love you. And so there's your military welfare. And then, of course, you've got the foreign aid welfare. I mean, that's just welfare. It's no different from food stamps or Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid. This $2 billion a year that has gone into the Mubarak regime year after year for 30 years. I mean, everybody knew that he had a torture chamber. That's nothing new. Everybody knew that he was a brutal dictator. And let me tell you something, that military dictatorship, it's not this benign little entity. But the money flows into there in the form of welfare. It's flowing into the Bahrainian dictatorship, into the Yemen dictatorship. It was flowing from Great Britain, which, of course, is a member of the U.S. empire, sort of, the Washington's poodle. They'll do whatever the U.S. says. The British were supplying weaponry to Gaddafi. That was welfare. And so this is, okay, what's the purpose of this foreign aid welfare? Well, it's to make the dictator dependent on the U.S. I mean, when you've got $2 billion in U.S. taxpayer money coming into the coffers and into the military coffers, you're going to go out and hire troops and hire bureaucrats and establish programs and provide welfare for the citizenry. And so you get dependent on this because you got a lot of people that have jobs, the bureaucracy and so forth, military personnel. In Egypt, the military runs businesses. And so, what happens if all of a sudden the U.S. says, well, we're going to think about pulling our $2 billion out every year? Well, the dictatorship's going to go ballistic. They're going to panic. Oh, my gosh. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? We're going to have to lay people off. Oh, my gosh. Please, Mr. U.S. Empire, tell us what you want us to do. You need a vote in the United Nations? You got it. You need a coalition of the willing? You got it. Whatever you need. And that's the whole purpose of this foreign welfare. It's to keep a tight control on these dictators, not control in terms of domestic policy. I mean, the U.S. doesn't care what these people do with respect to their own citizens. Oh, yeah, nowadays, you've got this so-called concern about what Gaddafi's doing to the citizens, and there's this little preaching about, Bahrain shooting its citizens in cold blood or Yemen shooting its citizens in cold blood. But, up to now, they didn't care. I mean, they knew these people these regimes have torture chambers. The U.S. even made a torture agreement with Egypt. And now, believe me, those torture chambers were being used when the U.S. made that agreement. And probably, I mean, the CIA went in and inspected it and watched how those torture chambers were being used and how good the torturers are. I mean, because, you're not going to go in there and hire a torturer to torture people on your behalf without inspecting the facilities. And of course, Egypt's renowned for torture, as I've said in previous programs. They're renowned for pyramids, but, torture's a close second. Well, the purpose of the foreign aid welfare is not to, tell the dictator, well, this is what you need to do to maintain control, because the U.S. wants that dictatorship to maintain control. If they're a member of the empire, they're a good dictatorship, despite the fact that they may be doing the same thing that Gaddafi's doing. Gaddafi's sin was that he was not a member of the empire, so, he's now going to go down. Same thing with, let's say, Chavez in Venezuela. They got nothing wrong, nothing against Chavez ideologically and philosophically. I mean, they believe in all these socialist programs: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, public schooling. I mean, all the things that Chavez believes in, U.S. officials believe in. But he's independent of the empire, and so that's why they don't like him. Same with Fidel Castro. So, that's the idea, is that you put these dictators on the dole, you make them dependent, they'll do your bidding. No different here in the United States. You put people on the dole, they will do your bidding. They won't object at a fundamental level. Now, okay, yes, there's fights politically. Should I vote for the Democrats? Should I vote for the Republicans? And there's this game. I mean, it's really one big party, the welfare warfare party. And they fight over who's going to run the programs, who's going to be in charge, who's going to get the largesse from, same sort of largesse the Saudi dictatorship gets, all the tax revenues coming in to, who's going to get their people in the jobs and so forth. Well, they put the citizenry, the American people, on the dole to make them dependent so that they don't challenge things at a fundamental level. Okay, in other words, you can complain, you can throw tantrums. It's like a little kid. Okay, here's the way to look at it. Okay, a parent puts a little kid on an allowance. Okay, and now the kid might throw some temper tantrums and so forth, but he's not going to challenge his mother or his father at a fundamental level, because he knows that his survival depends on the parents. So he can throw his little temper tantrum and stuff, but he's not going to really challenge the parents' right to be parents, to control. And same with Americans on the dole with the welfare state. Americans will carp about those bureaucrats, and by golly, those people in Congress, why they just keep messing things up, or the president's just not doing the job I hired him to do. I want another, president in there. So you see these little temper tantrums. But the dole recipients are never going to challenge government at a fundamental level for the same reason the child doesn't. This is what I was saying is that Americans have come to view the federal government in our time as their parent, as their daddy, or big brother, or a god. Their sustenance depends on this. Their sustenance depends on the government. Their dole, my gosh, if they challenge government at a fundamental level, what happens if the government cuts off their dole? And every American knows this. If it's not a conscious thought, it's a subconscious thought of, I don't want my dole eliminated. No. Okay, well, yeah, I'll carp against the government. I'll try to get my people in public office, but I ain't going to challenge anything at a fundamental level, especially not in foreign affairs. Because, again, that's the dominant role of the U.S. government. That's where the force is being exercised. Keep in mind that government is force. I mean, it's got a monopoly of force. And in foreign affairs, you've got this dominant role for the military-industrial complex. The idea is trying to control countries, manipulate them, maneuver them, get people in there, coups, assassinations, invasions. That's where all the action is. That's where the dictatorial powers are being exercised. Kidnapping people, assassinating people, torturing people. This is government in its pure form, and there are no controls on it. Now, there used to be, the Constitution the Constitution does require a congressional declaration of war before the president can wage war, but nobody cares about that. not in foreign affairs. The president is free to ignore any constitutional constraint with respect to foreign affairs. Now, people say, oh, well, Congress could cut the funds. Doesn't matter. The president would ignore it. If the president's going to ignore the Constitution on the Declaration of War proviso that's in there, he would ignore what the Congress does with cutting off funds. He just spends them. It's national security. He's at war. He's a commander-in-chief. He's got his helmet on. I mean, if they can justify kidnapping, torture, assassination, invasion, occupation, intervention now in Libya, this is where there is total dictatorship. Now, over here, the American people, they have to be kept mollified, pacified. That's the purpose of the welfare state. Keep people dependent, keep them soft. Now, we often talk about, how powerful America is. Well, that's a misconception. The government is powerful. I mean, we live under the most powerful government in history. The biggest, most powerful military, CIA. It's a military that has virtually omnipotent powers. They can even take us now into custody as suspected terrorists, torture us, abuse us. They can ignore jury verdicts in federal court trials now, at least on terrorism cases. And my hunch is that they're looking for ways to move this into the drug field too, where they can just ignore jury verdicts, take people into custody, cart them away to a concentration camp. I mean, this is the essence of government. Government is force, and they keep people softened and dependent. So while we live under the most powerful government in history, we really have among the weakest people in history. And remember, I was drawing this distinction between the private sector, the American people, and the federal government. Big, strong federal government, very, very weak people. And this is what the welfare state does. It weakens people. It softens people. I mean, look at the North Korean people. They're just about as docile as they can be. You're not going to see any protests there because this is what the welfare state does. And, of course, North Korea is your epitome of your socialism or welfare state. Everybody's controlled by everybody's employed by the government, guaranteed jobs. Government takes care of people, gives them their food and their housing and so forth. I mean, it's just a stronger version of the welfare state we have here. It's more complete. And you got a soft citizenry. Well, it's the same here. You've got a soft citizenry, ones that is terribly afraid of losing their Social Security or their Medicare or their Medicaid or their education grants and their SBA loans and so forth. That's what the welfare state has done. It has damaged such things as self-reliance, can-do, independence, that sense of, hey, I don't need the government to survive. I don't need the government to sustain my life, to prosper. Hey, we don't need the government to take care of people. That's what voluntary charity is all about. You don't see much of that anymore. Why? Because we've all been born and raised, these generations, under a welfare state with the mindset that, we couldn't survive without Social Security. Medicare and Medicaid. Oh, people would be dying in the streets of illness, starvation. Oh, food stamps. Oh, there's just no way. Oh, bailouts. Oh, how would corporations exist without, these welfare state bailouts or stimulus funds and so forth? This is what they've done to the American people. I mean, they've made America into a very weak nation with respect to a weak citizenry. This is why the citizenry, you don't see, like, for example, the American interventionists going over to Libya and join the rebels. I mean, you've got a soft people calling for government intervention. Well, if they really believed in helping the Libyan people, and they had a sense of can-do and spirit and independence, they just would fly on over to Libya and join the rebels. You're not going to see that. You're not going to see one American interventionist going overseas to join the rebels. It's too difficult. It's too tough. This is a weak people. A weak people don't do that sort of thing. Now, compare it when Americans, for example, went over into the Spanish Civil War and joined, the one side over there because, that was the mindset at that time. Hey, you believe that people need help, then get involved in the Civil War. Go on over there. Give your life for it if that's your cause. You're not going to see that here. You're not going to see one American interventionist join the rebels in Libya. All they're going to do is get their toughness vicariously. They're going to say, look how tough we are. By golly, we've shown Gaddafi. Boy, have we shown them, and we did this, and we bombed here, and man, we really won this war here. And notice the collective pronoun, the we. And what they're doing is conflating themselves, the weak, with the powerful government. And that's what the welfare state's done. Now, if you combine that with what public schooling does, where they teach you this deference to authority. I mean, that's the whole purpose of going to public schools is the state wants people in there. The state wants you from 6 years old to 18 years old. That's a long time. That's 12 years of mind molding where they fix people's minds in terms of deference to authority, respect for authority, trust your public officials, especially on foreign affairs. So that's why you now have an entire nation of people that, just are nodding their heads with respect to this Libya intervention. Oh, they may have some qualms or doubts or whatever, but they don't have that sense of, my government has no business doing this, and I'm going to take a stand against this. Because they're deferring to authority. Well, when you combine that mindset of deference to authority in foreign affairs, and to a large extent domestically too, but especially in foreign affairs, you see this in federal judges. I mean, you have your perfect public school mindset in federal judges. They always defer to authority in foreign affairs, despite what the Constitution says. I mean, their job is to interpret the Constitution. They never do that with respect to what the president does in foreign affairs. They defer to his authority. That's what public school inculcated in them. And so when you combine that mindset of deference to authority that was inculcated in people with the softening up, the dependency, the weakness that comes from the welfare state, I mean, the state has it. I mean, it's there's your control. That keeps the regime, the welfare warfare state, in power because, who wants to elect, libertarians into office when the libertarians are going to just eliminate the dole and eliminate all this foreign adventurism and the empire, and we're going to dismantle all that. Well, that just scares a weak citizenry to death. Oh my gosh, Jacob, what are you talking about? Oh gosh. Now, when you talk about specific welfare programs, you really get a sense of how scared Americans are about this business and with respect to libertarians. Like take Social Security. Now, Social Security is your crown jewel of your welfare state. I mean, it's at the very top. It's the one where, the liberal status and the conservative status, they won't touch it. They're so scared that the citizenry are going to go up in arms and do demonstrations. And I mean, how often do you hear about, Jacob, if we eliminated Social Security, well, there'd be riots. Like all these old people are going to be out there rioting with their pitchforks, and well, the fact is that Social Security is welfare. Now that just, drives Social Security recipients and would-be recipients, people around 60, late 50s, and so if we're looking forward to the dole, that just drives them crazy when you point out that truth. They say, oh, no, Jacob, I put it in. Well, you didn't put anything in. You got taxed. And your money was spent just like all tax monies are spent. There was no lockbox. You didn't have a fund, like your IRA. You know how you send a check to fund your IRA or your 401k or something? No, it's not like that. This is just a straight welfare program. Now, people say, oh, well, but Jacob, they told me, I remember back in 1968, a congressman was giving a speech and he promised me that this was going to be there forever and that it was mine and he was putting it in a fund. And hey, forget all that nonsense. Well, all that really matters is the law, and the law is the law. People that wanted to go look up the law and see what Social Security is could have easily done that during all those years. The Supreme Court, has flat out held long ago, decades ago, that Social Security is just a welfare plan. Now, it happens to be funded by a Social Security tax. Doesn't necessarily have to be that. It could be funded by the income tax. It could be funded by a tariff. It's just like food stamps or any other welfare program. It's just a straight welfare program. It's taking money from the young and the productive and giving it to the old people. I mean, this was the Marxian concept, from each according to ability, the young and the productive, to each according to need, the old people. And this is, in fact, this is one of the core elements of a socialist system, where you're taking money from those who have it through the force of government and giving it to those who, quote, need it, or those who are politically privileged, the elite, and so forth. Well, Social Security falls in that category. In fact, if you really wanted to see the reality of Social Security, think about when it was first enacted in the 1930s under Franklin Roosevelt. I guarantee you that those people didn't put anything in. That was the first generation of Social Security recipients. They were taxing the young and the productive to give them money. They didn't put anything in. But in essence, their position is no different from today's. It's a straight scheme where you're taking money from one group and you're giving it to another group. Now, people say, oh, no, Jacob, wait, there's a trust fund. There's a trust fund. There's no trust fund. Those bonds that they say, oh, well, we're putting bonds in here. It's just like an IOU to yourself. It's ridiculous. It's to pacify the masses. I mean, suppose you got $10,000 in cash in your safe at home for, to help with your kids' college bills. 10 years from now, you're building that up. And you take that $10,000 and you go buy yourself some stereo equipment. But you put an IOU in there. I owe this box $10,000. And then your kid, it's about 15 or so, he says, Dad, how's my fund, my fund there with the cash and everything? Oh, it's fine. It's fully funded. And of course, it's a lie. I mean, the money's gone. And that's the way Social Security is. Now, the benefit of Social Security is that it creates an entire class of people that are dependent on the state. I mean, it has really damaged the independence, the can-do of the elderly people. This is among the groups that will never challenge government at a fundamental level. For them, government is God. The federal government is God. They're going to support the government in foreign affairs. They're going to support what the government's doing. Oh, they may complain here and there, but they're never going to challenge at a fundamental level, because the government could always retaliate and say, we're going to slash your benefits, or we're going to cut your benefits, and so forth. Now, it's the same thing with Medicare and Medicaid. These are just welfare state programs, socialist programs, taking money from one group and giving it to another group. And it's not a coincidence that healthcare costs have soared, that doctors hate the medical profession. Doctors used to love what they did in life. I mean, they actually loved it. Now they hate it. They complain, they carp. The ones that are doing Medicare know that they can be indicted by a federal grand jury at any time based on some violation of some idiotic regulation. And since there's so many regulations, somebody's always in violation of one or more. That's the purpose of a regulated society. And, it's not a coincidence that in Cuba they have national health care, they have Social Security. This is the whole idea of make people dependent. And of course, you got healthcare costs soaring, and what do the liberals say? Oh, well, the conservatives say it too. It's because of free enterprise. It's because of free enterprise, which they define as that sector of human life that's not being controlled or regulated, which of course is always diminishing. But that's not the case. The reason prices are soaring in Medicare and Medicaid is what libertarians said back in the 60s when FDR's protege, Lyndon Johnson, adopted these programs. It's because of the programs themselves. Public schooling, classic welfare state program. I mean, remember, the purpose is to inculcate the mindset of deference to authority, the good little citizen, the Pledge of Allegiance, which, by the way, was drafted by a socialist, a guy named Bellamy. Not surprising. I mean, all this stuff starts to fit together, you see, and public schooling is based on taking money from one group of people, including people that don't even have children, in order to fund the schooling, and I say schooling instead of education, because that's what people get in public schooling. They don't get educated, they get schooled. But it's based on this welfare state concept, taking money from one group of people through force and giving it to another group of people. And it's not a coincidence that all these programs are in North Korea, Cuba, any kind of socialist country you'll find. In fact, it might surprise you to know where these programs came from. They originated among socialists in Germany. Public schooling, national health care, government, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all originated within socialists at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries in Germany. So, as Germany was moving forward through the 20th century, they were embracing all these programs, and they got imported to the United States. In fact, if you go to the Social Security website, you'll see a bust, not of Jefferson or Madison or the founding fathers of America, but of Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor of Germany, who was the first German ruler to adopt these socialist programs that he had taken from the German socialists. Now, people say, oh, well, Jacob, is it possible, to just, get rid of these programs? Could you really have a society? That's impossible without welfare and so forth. Well, when you've been born and raised under a welfare state, your mindset is, oh, well, gosh, we couldn't survive as a nation without this junk. I mean, that's the really bad part, is that, all the people that lived before the welfare state was adopted are mostly now dead. And so all that Americans know, including young people, is oh, welfare. So this is our nation. This is freedom. This is free enterprise. You see, because nobody's taught in public schools what this really is. It's ingrained in everybody's head in those 12 years that this is freedom and free enterprise. I mean, that's part of the process here. In fact, to symbolize why Americans are in such desperate straits, you go to a German thinker named Johann von Goethe, who said, "None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free." And that's the Americans. Americans truly believe they're free because they've got a welfare state and, of course, a warfare state too, an empire and so forth, military empire. Well, let's go back a little bit into American history. After the Constitution brought into existence the federal government, you had a society that really was the most unusual, different society in history, the freest society in history. Now, were there exceptions? Of course there were. We all know they were. There were big exceptions, like slavery being the biggest one, and there were tariffs, and there were very minor exceptions, as land grants to the railroads, subsidies to the steamships. At the state and local level, there may have been a price control here and there. But by and large, this is the most unusual, freest society in history. You had no Social Security for more than 100 years. You had no Medicare, no Medicaid. You had a free market in health care. You didn't even have occupational licensure of doctors or lawyers or shoe shine artists or hair salons and so forth. You had no income tax. You had no paper money. Americans used gold and silver coins because they didn't trust paper money. They knew what governments do with paper money. There was no Federal Reserve System, no central bank for most of that time. And this was a society that was that not only the freest, but it was also the most prosperous. Because when there was no welfare state, no warfare state, no empire and so forth, no income tax, people in the private sector, government was weak, but people in the private sector were accumulating massive amounts of wealth, independence, can-do. There was a spirit among the American people in the 19th century that it's phenomenal. Inventions. There was that sense of self-reliance. And, oh, by the way, the most charitable nation in history. You see, because Americans, our ancestors, they didn't believe in government coercion for charity. They saw coercion and charity as antithetical to each other, opposites. They believed in voluntary charity. So as people were accumulating vast amounts of wealth, they were also giving it away. This is how the museums got built, the opera houses, the hospitals, and so forth. So you had this combination of massive accumulation of capital, large amount of economic liberty. You had penniless immigrants flooding American shores that were becoming wealthy in 1, 2, or 3 generations. Because our ancestors, their position is, we're not going to send military forces to help you out overseas. We're not going to give you military welfare. There was not even a standing army because Americans oppose standing armies. They saw what goes on with standing armies in the Middle East today. Our ancestors predicted this. That's the purpose of standing armies. They turn the guns inward, and they loyally obey their master, the commander-in-chief. They will obey whatever orders he wants. So our ancestors said, we're not going to send military welfare to help you out if you're suffering under tyranny. The way John Quincy Adams said, we don't go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. What he meant by monsters was people like Gaddafi and the dictator in Egypt and Mubarak or Yemen or any of the U.S. supported dictators. These are monsters, and we're not going to send military armaments to help you, but we're going to have open borders so that if you get out, you can come to this country and we won't return you to your country of origin. We won't repatriate you. I mean, this was the most unique society in history. It was consistent with Christian principles in terms of free will. People had the freedom to choose what to do with their own money, what to do with their own lives. There were no drug laws. There was no military empire, no foreign bases, no military-industrial complex, no IRS, no income tax. It was a phenomenal society. Again, big exceptions, slavery, terrorists, and so forth, many minor exceptions. But they pointed the way to what a genuinely free society is all about. Now, with respect to slavery, it's interesting because, I think we all take a principled stand on slavery today. We, certainly libertarians do. We oppose it. We'd like to think that if we were transported back in, to the 1850s, say, that we would have, called for the abolition of slavery and not the reform of slavery. Not, hey, let's try to improve things on the plantation, or let's give slaves more say in how their taskmaster is treating them and so forth. I think the principal position that everyone would take is, no, slavery needs to be abolished. Even those today that defend secession and the right to secede, among the libertarians, would agree that secession should have been permitted, but slavery should have been dismantled. Those are not inconsistent positions. But what's ironic is how many conservatives and even some libertarians, they don't take the same position with respect to the serfdom of the welfare state. They're always calling for reform. The system needs reform, and they'll come up with a reform plan for Social Security, for example, and they call it the free enterprise approach or the libertarian approach, which is this government control system where the government manages it and the government gives you a choice of little funds to invest your money in, and you have to invest your money, but the choice is that you get to pick which fund. That's not freedom. I mean, freedom is the absence of control over what you do with your own money. We see it in public schools, with libertarians and conservatives, some libertarians, saying, oh, vouchers. It's just another welfare plan. You're taking money from those who have in order to give to those who, quote, need. And so, why not just call for the repeal of these programs? Why not just call for the end of them, the total dismantling? In other words, the same principled position that libertarians take on slavery, why don't those same libertarians take the same position on serfdom, on the welfare state? Leave it to the conservatives to call for reform. I mean, conservatives are famous for calling for reform. That's their shtick. I mean, I always know when I read a conservative article in the welfare state, because, they'll always point out the foibles of the welfare state, or some bureaucracy or some department. And because there's always foibles of the welfare state, just like they are in the military and the military-industrial complex and so forth. They're always screwing up, So it's fun to write an article saying, oh, look at this, look what this bureaucrat did, and look how this department did this, and look at the waste, fraud, and abuse, and look at the, $1 million toilet seat and so forth. But the way it's a conservative author is you go to the very bottom paragraph, and this is what I always do now. I always go to the last paragraph, and if it's a conservative, it's going to say the system needs reform. Okay, the program needs reform. That's a conservative, and it's an endless game, because then they adopt the reform, and the same conservative is going to be back 6 months from now talking about the foibles in that same government program. So you have this endless stream of op-eds and articles and foundations and think tanks and so forth. What distinguishes us libertarians, and what should distinguish us libertarians, is that we don't call for reform of these things. we call for their repeal, their eradication, their end immediately. Now, that brings up the final point that I want to make here tonight, and that's the moral case for freedom. Because that's the most important case. We can look at the utilitarian case, all the dependency, the damage, the destruction, what it's done to doctors, what it's done to human beings, that sense of loss of self-esteem and self-reliance. We can talk about all that. We can talk about the bankruptcy of this country, the impending bankruptcy with all the debt and the deficit. They're spending, $1.6 trillion more than what they're bringing in. You got Chinese communists loaning the money to the United States. We're looking at bankruptcy like Greece on the horizon. You don't know when it's coming, but you know that this can't go on forever. Another case as to why Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid should be repealed. In other words, that strong utilitarian case. The welfare state doesn't work. It just produces bad things. But the moral case is very simple. This is what distinguishes us libertarians from conservatives and from liberals, from statists. It's morally wrong to take what doesn't belong to you. And it's morally wrong for a government program to take money from a person to whom it rightfully belongs and give it to a person to whom it doesn't belong. And you can see this most clearly on a private basis. If I go and accost you in a dark alley, and I got a gun, and I make you go to the ATM, and I cause you to extract $5,000, and I take it from you, and I go take that $5,000 and I give it to the poor, or I give it to some elderly woman that needs an operation to save her life, or I give it to some school. Now, am I a good person for this? Am I, a compassionate, caring person that loves the poor, needy, and disadvantaged, like the liberals? Well, of course not. I'm just a thief. If I want to do these things, I need to do them with my own money. Or my own efforts. I need to go out and just join up. Like I was saying, go join up with the Libyan rebels. Take responsibility for your beliefs. You want to help out the poor? Get on in there. Donate your own money. Donate your life's efforts. But don't steal from someone else, because that doesn't mean anything about caring and compassion. That's sinful. Stealing is sinful. It's wrong. It's wrong to take what doesn't belong to you. The problem is that American statists, Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives, they honestly think that if the government's doing this, it somehow is different. But it's not different. It's just a gang of people that are ganging up on the people that have the money. Suppose you've got a classroom of 100 kids in there, and they vote to take the money from one of the 100 and give it to themselves, or to give it to the poor, or give it to the needy. Does that justify ganging up on that one person and taking his money? Even though 99% have voted for it? Of course not. And this, of course, gets back to an idea that we've talked about earlier in these programs, the idea of fundamental rights, that they're immune from the vote of the majority. They're immune from democratic vote. That's, things like freedom of speech and freedom of religion, freedom of the press. We don't put those up to majority vote. And that's the same principle with respect to people's money. That's the peaceful revolution, the revolution in thinking, the revolution in morals that we need in this country, that people have a right to do what they want with their own money. I don't care how rich they are. I don't care how middle class they are. I don't care how poor they are. Everyone's got a right to live his life the way he chooses, as long as his conduct is peaceful. And it's morally wrong to take money from some people in order to give it to other people. Now, can this work? Well, of course it can work. It's the only thing that can work. And this is what concerns me about, libertarians that call for reform of these government programs. That the message they're saying with this is that freedom doesn't work, that it can't work, that they don't have confidence in freedom. If you really believe that the elderly will get along fine if Social Security were repealed today, you'd have no reluctance to call for the repeal of Social Security today. I don't have any reluctance. I have absolutely no doubt that everybody would actually be much better off You've got a lot of rich people. They don't need the money. It's just extra money in their pockets. The people that the elderly that might need some help, they got kids. I mean, and the kids that are no longer paying Social Security taxes, that's a significant amount of money. No longer paying income taxes. Think what you're paying in income taxes. That's a large amount of money to help out your ailing parents or whatever. And that's the only honoring thy mother and father that really matters. And there might be some elderly that say, well, I need to go back to work. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, when I see elderly people out in the workforce, they're interacting with young people. I mean, they're still part of the vitality of life instead of sitting in some dark corner of a living room, waiting for the next welfare check to come in. But what we got to do is we've got to restore this sense of can-do, of belief in ourselves, a belief in freedom, a belief, a faith in God and a faith in ourselves, a faith in others. I love this line where liberals usually say this, Jacob, people, you just can't trust people to help others out. And so I'll turn it back and I say, well, why do you consider yourself such a bad person? And they always respond, oh, no, I wasn't referring to me. I'm a good person. I would help out others, but no one else would, in parentheses, including all my fellow liberals. Well, what we've got to do is if you count up all those people that say that, you got tens of millions right there. But what we've got to do is regain this sense of a faith in ourselves, a faith in freedom, a faith in free markets, a faith in capital accumulation, a faith in charity, a faith in others. We've got to get that sense of self-esteem, of a belief in ourselves as a people, so that we break this chain of dependency and scaredness, fear of the government. Oh, they're going to cut me off, and oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my dole, and so forth. And this is why we libertarians argue that we've got the superior case here. Not just with respect to the empire and foreign policy and the war on terrorism, which, as you know, I've been talking about for several weeks, but here domestically with the welfare state. That our paradigm is based on self-reliance and independence and voluntary charity and, in a religious sense, free will. It's a society in which there's prosperity taking place, massive accumulations of capital, rising standards of living, immigration, open immigration, where poor people are flooding in American shores, which are a benefit to a society. We'll talk about that in a future program. But this is the way of a free society. This is the way you help people. This, you let people earn their own way in life, and then you depend on voluntary charity to help those that are truly in need. So libertarianism is superior to statism, conservatism, and liberalism because of moral principles. Most of all, it's wrong to take what doesn't belong to you, either through the state or individually, privately. And the welfare state is this damaging narcotic that has done so much damage to our society. So if you'd like to learn more about these principles, come to our website at the Future of Freedom Foundation, fff.org, or the other libertarian organizations. We've got them all linked. You can see some of the top ones on our email update with links to all of them. And then we've got other links to other organizations, libertarian organizations, and some conservative free market organizations. And you can explore it further. But this, in essence, is what libertarianism is all about. It's the right to live your life the way you choose, so long as your conduct is peaceful. So that's our show tonight, and I'm going to be taking off a couple of weeks, so I'll let you know when I'm back. It'll be probably like 3 Saturdays from now or so, but I'll put it on Facebook and, of course, on our email update, which gives our upcoming events. And great to be with you again tonight. Thanks so much for listening in. If you're listening in live, thanks so much for listening in if you're watching a recorded version of this. And y'all have a very nice weekend, and thanks so much. Bye-bye.